Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of D&D Horror Stories. In today's video, we have a tale about a group that welcomes a new player to their campaign, only for said player to tear everything apart from the inside out. Also, a quick warning, as the following story will contain a slight mention of attempted self-deletion near the end. But before we get into the story, Ziggy has an important message.
ねと家族、ペットください。Very good.
Such a wise kitty. Y'all should listen to him. Anyway, let's get into the story, and strap in, it's a bit of a long one. Player cheats on boyfriend with other player. Destroys the group. By Reddit user, Nat20 Throwaway Check. This is a story about how my last tabletop RPG group fell apart due to players not respecting personal boundaries. I'm using a throwaway account as I know some of the people involved read Reddit, and I don't want to incite or be on the receiving end of any resulting drama. For ease of reference, the cast is as follows. Me, your dear writer and forever DM, tabletop RPG fanatic who has been running various systems for 10 plus years, including D&D, Call of Cthulhu, World of Darkness, and Shadowrun. Bard, a close family friend of mine. We've known each other for over 10 years and are still in regular contact after this story. Cleric, a mutual friend of mine and Bard's, who soon becomes a close friend of mine due to the enthusiasm he displays in D&D. Paladin, another of Bard's friends, best friend of 3 years to Cleric, and before long, a good friend of mine. Rogue, Paladin's girlfriend, who joins the game later, used to be a fashion model and is completely new to the world of tabletop RPGs. Ranger, a friend of Cleric's from work, who joins the game at the same time as Rogue. Our story begins in late 2019. I, a veteran forever DM of multiple game systems, am approached by my longtime friend, Bard, asking if I'd like to run a D&D 5th edition game for him, and a few of our mutual friends, who have always been interested in D&D, but never had the chance to play. It's been a while since I've had a regular group, so I jump at the chance, and being able to introduce some of my closest friends to a hobby that's very important to me sounds like an excellent time. Bard hosts our first few games at his house, and I meet and quickly become friends with Cleric and Paladin, as they take to the game like naturals, and we spend many hours outside of the game bonding over video games, music, and other nerd stuff. The group also includes my best friend of 20 years, playing a gnome wizard, and another one of Bard's friends, playing a drow fighter, though these two aren't relevant in the events to come, and are only mentioned for the sake of establishing our original group of 4. As most of the players are new to D&D, and I'm new to 5th edition, having only ran 3.5, I run the group through Lost Mines of Phandelver, and we have a fantastic time overall. Then, 2020 rolls around, and with it comes the pandemic. Lockdowns begin, and we can no longer meet at Bard's house to play in person. This doesn't end up being a problem, as I quickly work out how virtual tabletops work and set up a Discord so we can play online. Freed from the restriction of having to drive all over the state to meet up physically, we even end up playing every week as opposed to only having a session every fortnight. Everyone is having a great time, and playing tabletop RPGs keeps us all sane during the pandemic. After a while, Bard, Cleric, and Paladin even become interested in games other than D&D, so I end up running other games on alternating weeks, such as Call of Cthulhu, and even a bit of Vampire the Masquerade. Everything seems to be going well, and being all friends in real life, our group gels fantastically and has a bare minimum of drama. It's after a few months of playing online that 2 things happen that will spell the eventual doom of the group and the destruction of years-long friendships. The first is that Cleric begins to talk to a coworker about our adventures, and, excited to try tabletop RPGs, that coworker asks if he can join us sometime. The second is that Paladin's girlfriend, who has spent the last few months listening to our sexy voices, her words, wants to finally join our game. I've been enjoying my time with the group, and, in my mind, more people could only mean more fun times. So, I welcome both of these newcomers, and Ranger and Rogue soon become valued members of the group. Sadly, it's here where things start to go wrong, but definitely not in a way I expected. The first red flag shows itself when Rogue asks me for build advice for her character. Being new to the game and wanting to be a helpful DM, I oblige her, and we start talking on Facebook. After a while, the subject of these conversations changes from D&D to other nerd stuff, and soon, just life in general. I start to value Rogue as a friend, and every now and then, we spend hours talking to each other about our lives and problems, and just generally being there for each other. Several times, Rogue mentions that it was our sexy voices that got her interested in joining our game, and she says a number of things to me that are borderline creepy, such as asking what I, as a married man, think about polyamorism, or showing me pictures of when she was a model and asking me if I found them attractive. At this point, I feel it's important to specify that I'm actually asexual, and so the innuendo is lost on me, and I don't really think anything of it until my wife points it out to me. Now, realizing that Rogue is flirting with me and not wanting to lead her on, I tell her that I'm happily married and don't want to come in between her and Paladin, and thankfully, our conversations return to normal afterwards. I still value her as a friend, and thinking I've nipped the problem in the bud, I put these anomalies out of my mind and life continues on. The second red flag appears a few months later when I notice Ranger and Rogue flirting with each other in-game. This upsets Paladin a little, as being new to the hobby, he still sometimes has a problem separating in-character interactions from out-of-character interactions. I immediately lay down some rules for the group, stating that romancing other player characters is off-limits, as not everyone is comfortable with it. And both Rogue and Ranger agree to tone things down, and soon move on to romancing NPCs instead. It's at this point that Ranger comes to me to apologize, thinking he'd done something wrong. I tell him that no, nothing is wrong. It's just important sometimes to set boundaries, as not everybody treats the game with the same level of seriousness. He seems to understand this, and casually mentions that he has been talking to Rogue out of game, getting to know her, and that she thought it would be a fun plotline for their characters. He states that Rogue being Paladin's girlfriend in real life shouldn't come into it, and that he and Rogue just wanted to act out a storyline. While I agree with him that Paladin should learn to separate the game from real life, I tell Ranger that I'm erring on the side of caution so that nobody is uncomfortable in game. He says he understands, and I move on, feeling happy that I've resolved something and kept my group intact. We keep playing for a while, and while there's now a little bit of tension between Paladin and Ranger, it doesn't get to a point that disrupts the game. Then, suddenly, everything comes to a head in mid-2021. I'm getting ready to begin the next day's session when I receive a message from Paladin. He won't be able to make it to the game and isn't sure when he'll feel up to playing again. Sensing that something is obviously wrong, both Cleric and Paladin were the two players in my group who had never missed a session up until that point and looked forward to the game every day of the week. I asked him what had happened. Paladin tells me that Rogue has just broken up with him because she's been seeing someone else, and he is so shocked that he couldn't possibly work up the energy to play. I'm not sure what to do, so I just tell him to take the time he needs, and if he feels up to it, he's welcome to join us anyway. He thanks me for my offer, but tells me he'll need some time before he can play a game with Rogue in it, as he doesn't want either of them to bring their out-of-game drama into the game. So, I'm feeling a bit put out by this bombshell, being down a player and being concerned for both Paladin and Rogue, but Bard, Cleric, and Ranger are all still keen to play, so I go ahead and run the weekly session as per normal. It feels rather strange without Paladin there, and I can't help but notice that Rogue and Ranger have started flirting in character again. Paladin isn't there to feel uncomfortable, I figure, so I caution them to be careful and to remember our rule, but basically leave them to it after a while, being blissfully unaware that everything is about to go wrong next session. The next week's session comes around, and Cleric and I have spent a lot of time consoling Paladin, eventually convincing him to come and play with us. We make a promise that both he and Rogue will be civil to each other, and that everyone is just there to play a game. And I recognize now, long after these events, that this was my mistake. By putting these two people together in game, I was only inviting drama, but at the time, I thought I was just making sure my group ran smoothly, and just trying to maintain business as usual. Paladin joins the session, and we're right into a dungeon crawl. There's some light tension between Paladin and Rogue, but for the most part, the session is going smoothly, and everyone is enjoying working on the puzzles and sneaking around the monsters I've carefully placed. Then, for some reason, Ranger starts acting extremely competitive, trying to one-up everything Paladin's character does, and constantly belittling his decisions both in and out of character. He starts bragging about how he's dealt more damage this session than Paladin, or how he and Rogue work much better as a team than Paladin and Cleric do. This obviously gets to Paladin, who is already in a bad frame of mind and is essentially only there because Cleric and I forced him. Sensing some drama brewing, I stop the game and tell Ranger that he's being disruptive, and I warn him that if he doesn't stop needling Paladin, I'll end the session and kick him from the group. Suddenly, Rogue loudly exclaims that she doesn't care about Paladin's feelings, and that he's just acting like a baby, and that if I was going to kick Ranger, she would be leaving as well. I'm confused at this point, so I reiterate that attacking each other out of character is not tolerated in my game, and ask why she would be so offended by me telling Ranger to tone it down. That's when Ranger drops the bombshell on all of us. He is Rogue's new boyfriend, and has been dating her for at least a month. This single revelation destroys the entire group in a matter of minutes. Paladin quits in a haze of anger and hatred, humiliated by Rogue and Ranger. Cleric is disgusted by Ranger's behavior, and leaves to support his best friend. Obviously, I have no choice but to end the session, so I disconnect from voice chat and try to figure out how to process this mess. Rogue comes to me apologizing for Ranger's behavior, but insisting that they both did nothing wrong. I ask her what would make her think belittling Paladin in such a way right after they broke up was acceptable. Her response is to tell me why she broke up with Paladin in the first place. Apparently, she is polyamorous and saw nothing wrong with dating Ranger while still in a relationship with Paladin. And when Paladin discovered what she'd been doing, he wouldn't accept that she was poly, and so she broke up with him. I didn't quite know what to say to this, so I just said that I accepted that she had her reasons, and that it was none of my business. My hope was that, given enough time, people would start to cool down and we could move on. It's almost uncanny how swiftly the aftermath unfolds and destroys any faint hope of salvaging anything from this mess. Over the course of the next 48 hours, Paladin ends up having a mental breakdown, tries to kill himself by downing an entire packet of paracetamol, and makes graphic death threats to both Ranger and Rogue that result in him being visited by the police, taken to the hospital to have his stomach pumped, and then committed to the mental ward for a few days. Paladin tells Cleric that he resents him for bringing Ranger into the group, and Cleric, understandably, cuts ties with Paladin due to this, and his quite frankly scary behavior towards Ranger and Rogue after the fact. Ranger feels a little guilty after everything happens, and offers to keep playing with me, but neither me, Cleric, or Bard feel up to it. Rogue insists that she did nothing wrong, and that everything was just a ploy on Paladin's part for attention. This all happened about a year ago at this point. There's a bit more to the story, but this post is long enough as is, and it mostly seems irrelevant compared to what happened between Paladin, Ranger, and Rogue. I did intend to start a new game with Bard and Cleric and a couple of our friends, but shortly after all this happened, I was diagnosed with a chronic illness, and unfortunately, in the few months I took to come to terms with that and begin treatment, people fell out of touch, and those who are still around have new jobs and commitments. I'm still in contact with Bard, of course, as one of my oldest friends, and I still occasionally talk to Cleric, but Paladin essentially cut off contact with everyone, and out of concern for my health, I never made an attempt to contact Ranger or Rogue again. After a while, I missed DMing, and so I put out a call in some Discord and Facebook groups to recruit players, and I've now been playing with a brand new group for the last 5 months. Sometimes, I feel a little sad when I realize I'm playing with strangers instead of my actual friends, but with every session, I come to appreciate these strangers more and more, and on the bright side, the distance created by not knowing anyone personally will ensure that this group won't have the same issues. Update. After seeing how much of a reaction this story got, I thought I'd post a little update to try to answer some questions, clarify some things, and offer some resolution. First off, I totally understand that there were a number of times in this story where I dropped the ball or didn't handle something in the correct way. Inviting Paladin back to the game, or even allowing Rogue to continue being in the game after the first red flag, are things I definitely would have done differently with hindsight. I won't offer any excuses other than to say that, at the time, I was just happy to have what seemed like a regular group of real friends who all gelled together, and I honestly underestimated just how problematic these things actually were. During the pandemic, RPGs were essentially the only regular social contact we would have with each other, and trying to keep the group going to maintain that contact was my priority. I also feel it's important, once again, to point out that I'm Ace, and I know being Ace isn't an excuse for letting obviously manipulative behavior slide, but it does mean that I sometimes don't really recognize the same cues as allosexual people, particularly when it comes to flirting. It tends to go over my head and needs to be pointed out to me, and even then, I often don't recognize the full extent of it. Secondly, I fully understand that Rogue does not in any way represent the poly community. I know poly relationships are built on trust and mutual respect, and while I didn't really know anything about the poly community at the time, it became pretty obvious to me later that Rogue was just being an asshole and using being poly as an excuse. Finally, I sort of glossed over a lot of what happened at the end due to not wanting to make this post even longer, but I want to clarify that both Cleric and I did immediately check up on Paladin and tried our very best to apologize for what had happened and to support him. Understandably, he felt very betrayed, and while I don't condone death threats, it's obvious that he was in a very bad place at the time. These days, I do check in on Paladin occasionally, and last I heard from him, he has found a new girlfriend who cares about him and seems to be happy, though, understandably, doesn't ever want to touch a tabletop RPG again. I haven't personally spoken to either Ranger or Rogue, though from what I understand, mostly from Cleric as he still talks to Ranger, they're still together, but are going through a bit of a rough patch. Apparently, several months into their relationship, Rogue started seeing someone else behind Ranger's back, and when he found out, she threatened to leave him unless he accepted her for who she is, and he ended up, begrudgingly, consenting to the situation. TLDR. Player invites girlfriend to game. She tries to flirt with the DM and cheats with another player, ruining 2 friendships and destroying my group. Holy hell. I'm actually friends with a few people that are in poly relationships, and that is not how you do that. They are supposed to be built on trust, and by the sounds of it, Rogue never mentioned any of the relationship with Ranger to Paladin, and Ranger is also at fault for not disclosing it. Plus, it seems like that trend is continuing now with her and Ranger's fling. She's basically just using the term poly as an excuse to cheat on people. It is a shame what happened to Paladin, but like OP said, it's never okay to dish out death threats. It really sucks that the entire group was destroyed by all of this, but there is a lesson in that, when it comes to tabletop RPGs, it's usually best to let the blooming relationships just be in game. Thankfully, it sounds like OP is now playing online with a new group, and I know that he says it kinda sucks that they aren't actually friends IRL, but to that, I just say, wait. But that will do it for today's video. I hope you all enjoyed it as much as Nipsey enjoys catnip. If you have a story that you would like to be shared in a video, be sure to post it to the dndDoge subreddit, or even just contact me on Twitter. As always, I appreciate all of you, and may all of your rolls be natural 20s. Until next time.